I don't care if I pass out, take it. She needs it more than I do, Vincent Nolan said, gripping the edge of the hospital cot as the nurse tightened the strap around his arm. He hadn't meant to be here. He was only dropping off a forgotten lunchbox for his 5-year-old son, Caleb, who had left it on the kitchen counter in their tiny apartment. But as he walked past the emergency wing, he overheard a nurse say something about a rare blood type and how they were running out of time. Vincent had that blood type. He hadn't asked questions. He just stepped forward, nodded, and volunteered on the spot. The last $20 in his pocket were meant for groceries. Now he'd probably need it to get home since the donation might leave him too dizzy to walk. But none of that mattered. The nurse looked at him, eyebrows lifted. "You sure? We can't pay you for this." "I'm not doing it for money." Truth was, he didn't have time to think about money. Not when someone's life was on the line. Not when he knew what it was like to almost lose someone you love. He couldn't let that happen to someone else. 20 minutes later, the blood bag was full, and Vincent was woozy, sitting in the recovery area, sipping a juice box like a kindergartner. He didn't ask who the woman was, didn't care. He'd done what he could. That was enough. He barely noticed the nurse glance at the name chart before hurrying away to deliver the blood. He didn't see the frantic security outside the ICU or the 2 men in suits whispering into radios. He had no idea that the woman lying unconscious in the hospital bed, pale and barely breathing, was Manhattan's youngest female CEO and one of the richest women in the country. Madeline Grayson. 2 days later, Vincent was back to waking up at 5 a.m., packing Caleb's school bag, and heading to the construction site where he worked as a day laborer. Life went on. Rent still had to be paid. Caleb still needed bedtime stories and grilled cheese sandwiches. But across town, in a penthouse wrapped in glass and steel, Madeline was waking up to the sound of her private physician telling her, "You would have died if it weren't for that donor. Your blood type is rare. We were minutes away from losing you." She blinked, lips dry. Who was it? They didn't leave a name, just signed the form and left. Madeline sat up, heart racing. She didn't remember much from the accident, just the screech of tires, a flash of headlights, and then darkness. But this stayed with her. The idea that a stranger had saved her life and walked away without asking for anything. "Find him," she said softly. "Please, I need to find him." It took her team 3 weeks. They tracked the nurse who logged the donor's name. The form had been incomplete, but the nurse remembered him tall, lean, tired eyes, and a construction badge clipped to his shirt. Vincent Nolan. She had her assistant call every construction company in the city. On the 5th try, someone remembered a guy named Vincent who had missed work the afternoon of the incident. Madeline didn't send a car. She didn't send flowers or a gift card. She wanted to see him in person. So one rainy Thursday afternoon, Vincent was picking up Caleb from school when a black SUV pulled up beside him, and a woman stepped out. He recognized her instantly. Not from magazines or business articles, he didn't have time to read those, but from the hospital that day, the photo that flashed briefly on the nurse's computer. He hadn't meant to look, but the name stuck. Madeline Grayson. Now she was standing in front of him, in a navy coat, her dark hair pulled into a neat twist, heels clicking against the pavement. "Vincent Nolan?" she asked. He looked between her and Caleb, who was tugging at his sleeve. "Yeah." "I'm Madeline Grayson. I think you saved my life." He blinked. "You, what?" She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "At the hospital, the blood donation, that was you, wasn't it?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, but I didn't know it was you. I mean, I wasn't doing it for." "I know, that's why I'm here." Caleb looked up at her. "Are you famous?" Madeline crouched down and extended her hand. "Only a little." Vincent cleared his throat, unsure what to do with his hands. Look, I didn't do that expecting anything. I just heard someone needed help. I know, and that makes me want to know you even more. That night, she sent a car to pick them up. Not to a restaurant, not to a press event. To her home. I figured we'd skip the cameras and just have dinner. I owe you that, she said. Vincent didn't know what to expect, but it wasn't her barefoot in the kitchen, apron tied around her designer dress, flipping grilled cheese sandwiches for Caleb and pouring him chocolate milk. This isn't what I thought billionaires ate, he said, watching her. She shrugged. I was raised by a single mom. We had these every Friday night. I never stopped loving them. He smiled. Caleb's obsessed. You've made a friend for life. And he had. Caleb followed her around all evening, asking questions, showing her his drawings, giggling when she made funny voices reading bedtime stories. And Vincent watched. Watched this powerful, brilliant woman kneel on a carpeted floor and build a race car track with his son out of plastic pieces. Watched her laugh when Caleb splashed her accidentally during bath time. Watched her kiss his forehead gently as she tucked him in. He didn't understand it, why she'd want to be here, with them, in their small, messy life. But as they sat on the balcony afterward, city lights stretching behind her, she turned to him and said, "You gave me my life back. I think I want to spend it finding out who you are." Vincent looked at her stunned. "Madeline. I don't care that you're not rich. I don't care that you live in a walk-up. I care that you put someone else first without hesitation, that you love your son like the world depends on it, that you're kind, that you showed up when no one else could." He didn't know what to say. So he didn't say anything. He kissed her. And when she kissed him back, slow and certain, he knew. This wasn't just a thank you. This was the beginning of something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Vincent adjusted the collar of his shirt for the third time, standing in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway of the boutique hotel suite. The shirt wasn't his. Neither were the dark washed jeans or the leather jacket draped over the armchair. They'd arrived earlier that afternoon, delivered by a courier with a handwritten note bearing only her initials, M.G. He hadn't wanted to accept them, but the truth was, his best shirt still had paint stains on the cuff, and the idea of showing up to wherever she was taking him in that felt disrespectful, not to her wealth, but to her effort. Caleb was already asleep back at the apartment, his babysitter watching cartoons with the volume low. Vincent had stood by the door for 5 full minutes before stepping out, locking it behind him with the sinking feeling that this night wasn't just a dinner, it was a door creaking open to a world he'd never been meant to enter. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the penthouse floor. He stepped out to a private foyer made entirely of white marble. The only sound was the low hum of classical music drifting through the air, and when the double doors ahead opened, Madeline stood there, framed by soft golden light. She wore a graphite-colored jumpsuit with an open back, her hair swept up with a thin silver pin. No jewelry, no dramatic makeup, just her. "You clean up well," she said, eyes flicking over him as she stepped back to let him in. "I had help," he replied, glancing down at the outfit. "You didn't have to send all this." "I wanted to, and you didn't object." "I didn't say thank you either." She closed the doors behind them and walked past him, her bare feet silent on the polished wood floors. "You're welcome." The suite was expansive, but it didn't feel cold. There were books stacked on end tables, an open sketchpad near the window, and a half-drunk cup of tea beside it. The air smelled faintly of citrus and something warm like cinnamon. It surprised him. "I figured we'd eat here," she said, picking up a remote and dimming the lights until they glowed like candlelight. "No press, no expectations." Vincent followed her to the dining area, where a small table was set for 2 beneath a woven glass chandelier. The food was already plated grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, and something green he didn't recognize but smelled like herbs and garlic. "Did you cook this?" he asked, pulling out his chair. She laughed lightly. "I did. I needed something to focus on today." He sat and looked at her over the flickering candle between them. "Rough day." She hesitated, then reached for her water glass. "My board's pushing back against a partnership I want. They think the brand's too unrefined for our image." Vincent raised an eyebrow. Translation, not rich enough. Madeline's lips quirked. "Exactly." He took a bite of the salmon and let out a low whistle. "If this is how you handle boardroom stress, I think you're onto something." She settled into her seat, watching him. "So, tell me something I don't know about you." He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin. "Like what?" "Anything, something you haven't told anyone in a long time." He leaned back, considering. "All right, when I was 14, I wanted to be an architect. Used to draw houses on the back of cereal boxes." Her eyes lit up with interest. "What stopped you?" "My dad left. Mom couldn't work and someone had to bring in money. School became optional." Madeline's fingers tightened around her fork. "You gave it up for your family." He shrugged, didn't feel like a choice. "You still draw." "Sometimes, not houses anymore, mostly spaces, rooms, how they feel, not just how they look." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "You should come with me tomorrow." He blinked. "To where?" "My office. We're redesigning a few workspaces, and I'd like your opinion." "You have designers for that." "I have professionals," she corrected. "What I need is perspective, someone who understands how people move through a day, how they rest, how they think." Vincent shook his head, nearly laughing. "You want a construction worker to walk into a billion-dollar firm and give opinions on office flow." "I want you," she said evenly, "to trust that I see something valuable in you. And I want you to stop hiding behind labels that don't define who you are." He stared at her. "Why me?" "Because you're not trying to impress me. You're just honest." He looked down at his plate, heart thudding for reasons he couldn't name. "All right, I'll come." "Good." They finished dinner slowly, neither rushing the conversation. She told him about the first time she pitched a product and got laughed out of the room. He told her about the time he tried to fix a leaky faucet and flooded the kitchen instead. They laughed more than he expected, and when she walked him to the elevator, she didn't lean in for a kiss. She just looked at him and said, "Tomorrow, wear whatever you want, as long as it's you." The next morning, Vincent stood outside the towering glass building bearing her name. It was early, just past 7, and the city still felt half asleep. He wore his own clothes this time, dark jeans, a clean Henley, and the same boots he wore to work. He felt like an intruder as he stepped into the polished lobby, but the receptionist smiled and nodded before saying, "She's expecting you." The elevator opened directly into the executive floor. Everything around him gleamed brushed chrome, pale oak, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the skyline. He followed the sound of voices until he reached a large, open room where Madeline stood with 2 men in tailored suits, pointing at a digital layout projected onto the wall. When she saw him, her expression shifted instantly, eyes softening, posture relaxing. "Gentlemen, this is Vincent Nolan," she said. "He'll be consulting on this project." The taller man arched a brow. "Consulting?" "Yes," she said smoothly. "He's here to help us understand how real people use space. Not just how it looks, but how it lives." Vincent stepped forward, unsure what to say, but she gave him a nod that steadied him. He glanced at the layout and pointed at a small break room tucked behind a wall of glass. "No one's gonna relax in there." The shorter man blinked. "Why not?" "Because it's too exposed. You're showing employees where they can take a break, but not giving them permission to actually rest. That's not a break room. That's surveillance with snacks. Madeline grinned, the others fell silent. By the time the meeting ended, Vincent had made 7 suggestions, 4 of which the design team immediately approved. When they left the room, she caught his hand and pulled him gently into her office. "You crushed that." "I didn't say anything revolutionary." "No," she said, "you said something honest. That's rarer than you think." He looked around her office, sleek, angular, with a massive desk made of steel and glass and a single photo on the shelf. It was her and a woman who looked like her, older, with the same eyes. "Your mom." She nodded. She passed a few years ago. "I'm sorry." "She used to tell me, don't chase the throne if you can't carry the crown. Think about that a lot." He turned to face her. "Seems like you're carrying it just fine." She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "I'm not interested in being carried, but I wouldn't mind someone standing beside me." Vincent didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." And for the second time, they kissed, but this time, it wasn't about gratitude or surprise. It was about choice. And when they pulled apart, she whispered against his skin, "I don't want this to be temporary." He looked into her eyes, heart pounding. "Then let's not pretend it is." Vincent didn't realize how fast things had shifted until he was standing in the middle of a sunlit event space on the Upper West Side, surrounded by strangers in tailored suits and satin cocktail dresses, holding a glass of champagne he hadn't asked for. The space was all white marble and glass, with gold trim curling around the columns like vines. A string quartet played near the far wall, their music echoing under the vaulted ceiling. The whole room felt like it had been dipped in wealth. He tugged at the collar of his midnight blue dress shirt, a gift from Madeline, though she hadn't called it that. It had arrived earlier that day in a plain box without a note, but the tag had her initials stitched into the cuff. She'd never mentioned it when she picked him up in a town car shortly after sundown, only smiled when he stepped inside and said, "You clean up better every time." Now she was across the room, deep in conversation with a man twice her age with white blonde hair and a face like polished granite. Her hand rested lightly on her hip, posture sharp, eyes unwavering. She was magnetic. Everyone in the room looked at her like gravity bent around her. He hadn't asked what this event was for. She'd simply said, "I want you with me tonight," and he'd said yes. "Vincent Nolan, isn't it?" a woman asked, appearing beside him with a glass of red wine. Her hair was pulled into a sleek twist, her dress a deep plum shade that shimmered beneath the chandelier light. He turned slightly, nodding. "Yeah." "I'm Elena. I work with Madeline, Strategic Partnerships." Her eyes flicked over him, curious but not unkind. "Interesting to see you here." "Why?" "You're not exactly one of the usual suspects." Her tone was matter-of-fact, not dismissive. "Guess not." She took a sip of her wine. "You're the donor." "Is that what people are calling me?" She smiled faintly. "It's what the board is calling you, unofficially. They've been buzzing ever since she brought your name into the last meeting. Some of them think you're a PR stunt. Others think you're a disruption." "And what do you think?" "I think she doesn't do anything without a reason. And if she's keeping you this close, you're either more important than we realize, or she's finally letting herself want something that isn't on a spreadsheet." Before Vincent could respond, Madeline's voice cut through the hum of the room. "There's someone I want you to meet." She was at his side now, her hand brushing his lightly before she turned to the man beside her. "Vincent, this is Raymond Kane. He's been with Grayson since it was just an idea scribbled on the back of a napkin." The older man extended his hand. "So you're the man who saved our CEO's life." Vincent took it. "I didn't know who she was at the time." "Even better, Raymond said with a dry chuckle. We need more people around here who act without calculating the benefit. Madeline's gaze lingered on Vincent for a second longer than necessary, then she turned back to Raymond. Ray's retiring this year. We're hosting this event in his honor. Vincent nodded, suddenly aware of how far from his usual world this was. Congratulations. It's bittersweet, Raymond said, but I've always believed in leaving before the hunger fades, and trust Madeline to lead this company into something more than profit margins. A server passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Vincent declined, but Madeline plucked a fig crostini and handed it to him. You haven't eaten. I'm fine. You're not, I know that face. He took the bite with a sigh, chewing as he glanced around the room. Everyone's looking at me like I wandered in here by accident. Let them. He arched a brow. You don't care. I care about you, not what they think. She said it so simply, so unapologetically, that it knocked the breath out of him. Later, after the speeches and the champagne toasts, she led him to a quiet balcony off the main ballroom. The city spread out beneath them, glittering and endless. Why am I really here? He asked, leaning on the marble railing. Madeline stood beside him, her voice low. Because I didn't want to walk into that room without you. He turned his head. You've done it 1,000 times. Not like this, she hesitated. Raymond's stepping down. I'm assuming full control. That means more scrutiny, more press, more expectations. I needed to know I wasn't alone in that. You're not. She looked at him then, really looked. I've never let my personal life cross into my professional world. But you, Caleb, you changed the way I think about time, about value, about what matters when no one's watching. Vincent exhaled slowly. I'm not equipped for this world. I don't speak its language. I'm not asking you to adapt, she said. I'm asking you to stay exactly as you are. He reached for her hand. You sure you want that? Yes. A beat passed, then she added, there is something I need to tell you. He tensed. What is it? My father, he's on the board. Silent but influential. He's old money and very traditional. He thinks I need to marry someone who can match the empire. Vincent gave a dry laugh, and I'm not exactly Forbes approved. He'll push back hard, but I don't make decisions based on approval. I never have. What happens when he makes it personal? I'll handle it, her jaw tightened. I've been handling him my whole life. He studied her face, the steel beneath the softness. What do you want from me, Madeline? She turned to face him fully. I want a life that isn't made of headlines and quarterly earnings. I want mornings that start with real conversation. I want to help Caleb build Lego castles and argue about whether dinosaurs could live on the moon. I want to know what it feels like to come home and not have to perform. Vincent didn't answer right away. The wind pulled at his collar, and somewhere below, the sound of traffic drifted upward like distant waves. I want that too, he said finally. She stepped forward, her hand curling around the back of his neck. Then we fight for it. The next day, everything changed. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. Vincent let it go to voicemail, but 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Madeline. I think my father just called you. He checked the voicemail. The voice was clipped formal. This is Charles Grayson. I'd like to speak to you, Mr. Nolan, in person. Yeah, he did, Vincent said. I'm sorry. I had no idea he'd reach out directly. What should I do? Meet him, but don't let him intimidate you. Easy for you to say. No, it's not, trust me. 2 hours later, Vincent stood in the middle of a private cigar lounge in Midtown, across from a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone and polished by legacy. You're a construction worker, Charles said, not as a question but a statement. Among other things. You have no college degree, no financial portfolio, no pedigree. Vincent crossed his arms. Have a son, have integrity, have enough sense to know none of those things are on your checklist. Charles poured himself a bourbon. You're not the future I envisioned for my daughter. That's fine, she's not the future I envisioned for myself either, but I'm glad we found each other. Charles sipped his drink. Do you love her? Yes. Would you walk away if it meant protecting her reputation? Vincent's jaw tightened. The only thing that would ever make me walk away is if she asked me to, and she hasn't. Charles set the glass down. She's changed since meeting you. Maybe she needed to. That night, Madeline showed up at his door without warning. No driver, no coat, just her and the rain. He opened the door, startled. What happened? My father tried to buy you off, didn't he? Vincent stepped aside to let her in. He tried something. She took his face in her hands, eyes wet from the storm. I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her before she could say anything else. And when they broke apart, breathless and soaked, Vincent whispered, "Then neither am I." The elevator doors slid open into the private lobby of Madeline's penthouse, but this time, Vincent wasn't arriving as a guest. He held Caleb's hand, his son's little backpack slung over one shoulder, and a folded piece of paper in his other hand, the official acceptance letter into the Grayson Foundation's Early Learning Scholarship Program. A program Madeline had quietly expanded weeks earlier, long before she ever mentioned it to him. She stood waiting at the end of the hall, barefoot, wearing a soft navy sweater and cream linen pants, looking nothing like the woman who'd once commanded boardrooms and gala floors without blinking. This version of her hair loose, sleeves pushed up, no armor in sight was the one Vincent had fallen for. The one who had walked into his world and never once asked him to leave it behind. Did he read it yet? She asked, her gaze flicking to Caleb. Front to back, twice. He's already asking if they have a dinosaur section in their library. She laughed, reaching to ruffle Caleb's hair as he ran past her toward the living room. Vincent stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. You didn't have to do this. I didn't do it for you or for me. I did it because he deserves a future that doesn't depend on what either of us can afford. He watched her cross to the kitchen, where a pot of water was heating on the stove. You're not afraid of pushing boundaries, are you? I've been told it's a Grayson defect. And your father still hasn't returned my last message. I didn't expect him to. He won't apologize or change, but he'll stay out of our way. You sure? Yes, she turned then, facing him fully. Because I'm making it very clear that this is the life I'm choosing, and I won't let anyone muscle it out of my hands. Vincent stepped closer, slipping the paper into his back pocket. You always sound so certain. I'm not always, but with you, I don't doubt. He reached for her hand, their fingers threading automatically. Then let's stop waiting for the next shoe to drop. What do you mean? I mean, let's stop living like it could all blow up tomorrow. Let's start building something, together. A pause. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I want a life with you, all of it, not just visits and dinners and stolen hours between your meetings and my shifts. I want a home that belongs to all three of us. I want mornings with burnt toast and evenings spent helping Caleb with science projects we both don't understand. I want to be the man who walks into every room beside you, not behind you. I'm ready. She inhaled, chest rising slowly. You're serious. I've never said anything more serious in my life. She didn't respond with words. She just pulled him forward and kissed him slowly, deeply, not in the way people kiss at the start of something, but in the way they do when they've already decided there's no end. 2 weeks later, they moved into a house in the West Village. Not a mansion, not a penthouse. A historic brownstone with ivy crawling up the brick and a tiny backyard where Caleb could dig holes and call them hidden treasure spots. The floors creaked, the windows needed resealing, and the cabinets were far too high, but it was theirs. Madeline didn't bring her staff. She insisted on learning how to make pancakes from scratch, even if she set off the smoke alarm twice. Vincent installed shelves by hand, painted Caleb's room with a mural of planets, and spent every free hour making the place feel like a home. One evening, Madeline came home to find Vincent standing in the dining room, surrounded by swatches of fabric and a dozen open folders. "What's all this?" she asked, slipping off her shoes. "I've been sketching again. Thought maybe I could design functional furniture. Stuff that looks good but actually works for families like ours. Maybe even start a line." She stepped closer, flipping through the hand-drawn sketches. "These are good, really good. I've been thinking, maybe I don't need to be on a site forever. Maybe it's time, try building something different. I'll back it if you want." He looked up. "I want to do this on my own, but I wouldn't mind you as my first customer." "Deal." She reached for one of the sketches, smiling. "Can I keep this one?" "Only if you tell me why." "It's the one with the reading nook, the one with space for two. It's based on Caleb's bedtime routine. He always wants someone beside him. He's not the only one." That winter, Vincent launched Nolan Crafted. It started small, just a website and a few custom orders from local families. But word spread fast. Parents loved the designs. Furniture that could handle marker stains, roughhousing, and still look like something out of a magazine spread. Madeline never pushed it into her network, but when a popular parenting influencer bought one of his pieces, things took off. Meanwhile, Madeline made changes at Grayson Industries. She restructured the board, expanded community outreach, and implemented a new mentorship initiative for young women in business. She didn't just change the company's reputation, she changed its culture. One afternoon, while Vincent was sanding a bookshelf in the garage, she came outside holding an envelope. "What's that?" he asked, wiping sawdust off his hands. "A letter from City Hall." "Are we in trouble?" "No, they want to honor you." He blinked. "Me?" "For your work with the Grayson Foundation. For the families you've helped through your designs. For being the kind of man who makes people believe in good again." He leaned against the work table. "I didn't do it for awards." "I know, that's why you deserve them." She handed him the letter, then pulled something else from behind her back. This came with it. It was a key, not to their house, not to the foundation. "To the community center we're opening next spring," she said. "They want you to design the entire space." His chest tightened. "You serious?" "I wouldn't joke about something like this." He looked at the key, then at her. "You're changing lives." "We are." That night, after Caleb fell asleep surrounded by a pile of model rockets and dog-eared books, Vincent sat beside Madeline on their back steps, watching the stars blink into place above the city. "I never expected any of this," he said quietly. "I didn't either. I thought I was just giving blood. I didn't know I was giving myself a second chance." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You didn't just save me, Vincent. You reminded me that there's more to life than ambition. You gave me a reason to come home." He kissed the top of her head, his hand resting over hers. "So what now?" "Now we write the rest of the story, together." 3 months later, they stood in the community center's open courtyard, surrounded by families, laughter, and the scent of fresh paint and roasted coffee. Caleb ran ahead with a group of kids, his laughter echoing off the newly built walls. Vincent stepped up to the podium, his voice steady. "I was once just a guy trying to make it through the week. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a roadmap, but I had a reason to keep going, to keep trying. And then someone walked into my life and reminded me that sometimes the best things happen when you're not looking for them. He paused, looking at Madeline in the front row, her eyes filled with quiet pride. We're building more than furniture here. We're building homes, futures, hope, and I'm grateful every day that I get to do it with the person who believed in me before I knew how to believe in myself. The applause was thunderous. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the lights inside dimmed, Vincent pulled Madeline into the middle of the empty courtyard and held her close. "Let's make it official," he murmured. She blinked up at him. "Vincent." He pulled the ring from his pocket. Simple, solid, something he'd made himself, shaped and polished by hand. "I know we've already built a life together, but I want to call it what it is. Forever." She didn't cry, she didn't gasp. She laughed softly, kissed him, and said, "Then what are we waiting for?" They married that spring. No press, no spectacle. Just them, Caleb in a bow tie too big for his shirt, and a garden filled with people who had watched two lives collide and become something neither of them had expected. A story that didn't begin with privilege or power, but with a single act of kindness. And a love that changed everything. The sun dipped low over the Hudson, casting a honeyed glow through the tall windows of the new Grayson-Nollan Community Center. The opening had been a success, and the building was already humming with life kids in after-school art programs, single parents attending career workshops, and teenagers studying in the tech lab Vincent had insisted on equipping with ergonomic desks and real-world tools. But tonight, the building was quiet, reserved for one more celebration. Madeline stood in the hallway outside the multipurpose room, her arms crossed as she watched the final touches being arranged. The team had transformed the space with string lights, fabric draped from the ceiling, and centerpieces made from reclaimed wood and wildflowers. Vincent's idea. It was the first time Grayson Industries had hosted a formal company event here, and it wasn't just symbolic. It was intentional. She wanted her board, her investors, and her oldest allies to step inside this building. Vincent emerged from the side corridor, rolling up the sleeves of his charcoal shirt. The projector's working now. Had to rewire the HDMI input, but it's good. She turned to him. "You fixed it yourself." Figured it was faster than waiting for tech support. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "By the way, Caleb drew this for you. Said he wanted you to have something for your big speech." She opened it carefully. It was a crayon drawing of her standing at a podium, wearing a crown made of stars with a speech bubble that said, "Let's do good things." Madeline blinked, suddenly unable to speak. Vincent leaned in, voice low. "He says he wants to be mayor now." She laughed softly, tucking the drawing carefully into her clutch. "He already has my vote." Their guests began to arrive soon after. The room filled with faces from every corner of Madeline's life, some who had doubted her before, others who had backed her from the start. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, but every time she looked over her shoulder, Vincent was there, not as an accessory, as an equal. When the time came for her to speak, she stepped onto the small stage and looked out at the sea of well-dressed strangers and familiar faces. But her eyes went first to Vincent, standing near the back, arms folded, watching her like she was the only thing in the room worth focusing on. "This center isn't just a building," she said. "It's the result of a long, often difficult journey, one I didn't walk alone. A few years ago, I believed success came from staying untouchable, from perfection, from distance. But I was wrong. Real strength comes from connection, from showing up, from choosing to keep your heart open even when it's inconvenient." She paused, her voice steady. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating milestones. It's about honoring the people who helped build them brick by brick, idea by idea, act by act of grace." There was polite applause, but it was Vincent's eyes that anchored her. And when she stepped off the stage, he was waiting by the side door. "You meant all of that?" he asked as they slipped out into the quiet hallway. "Every word." "Then I have something for you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace, simple, understated, but unmistakably hand-carved. A single charm hung from the chain, a miniature door etched into the walnut, complete with tiny hinges and a brass keyhole. She traced her finger over it. A door. "It opens," he said, gently lifting the lid of the charm. Inside was a sliver of paper folded tight. She slid it out and opened it. It read, "Home is wherever you are." "I made it for you the week we moved in," he said. "I wasn't sure when to give it to you." She looked up, eyes shining. "You built me a home before we even had a roof." "I built you one the minute you let me in." They stood close now, the quiet hum of the city just beyond the windows. She rested her forehead against his. "You still want forever." "With you, every damn day." A few days later, they stood in a small garden behind the center, surrounded by the people they loved most. Caleb held the rings, beaming as he took his role with the seriousness only a child could muster. The ceremony was quiet, personal, no photographers, no press, nothing performative. Madeline wore a dress the color of old paper, soft and unstructured, with a ribbon tied at her waist. Vincent wore a suit he'd tailored himself, the vest lined with a fabric pattern Caleb had picked out, tiny stars and planets that no one could see but them. Their vows were simple. "I never thought I could trust someone with the pieces of me that didn't shine," she said, her voice steady. "But you saw them, you held them, and you never pulled away." He took her hands. "You taught me that love isn't a rescue mission. It's a choice, one we make every day. I choose you, I'll keep choosing you." Caleb gave them the rings, and when they kissed, the small crowd erupted in cheers, laughter echoing between the garden walls. Afterward, they sat on the back steps of the building, shoes off, plates balanced on their knees as they shared leftover cake and watched Caleb chase falling petals across the grass. "You think we'll ever stop surprising each other?" Vincent asked, brushing a crumb from her cheek. "I hope not," she said. "I don't think love should ever go quiet." "I was thinking," he said, "about opening a second workshop. Maybe in Brooklyn. I've had some interest." "Do it," she said at once. "You think it's too soon?" "No, I think you're ready." He smiled, but it was the quiet kind, that held the weight of knowing he didn't have to prove himself anymore. Not to her, not to anyone. That night, after Caleb had fallen asleep in the backseat, still clutching a slice of cake wrapped in foil, they drove home with the windows down and the radio low. Vincent reached for her hand at a red light, holding it without fanfare, just a gentle squeeze that said more than any words could. They pulled up to their brownstone, the porch light casting a soft glow on the steps. Vincent carried Caleb inside while Madeline locked the door behind them. She stopped in the hallway, watching him tuck their son into bed, brushing a hand through his hair before pulling the covers up. When he turned around, she caught his hand again. "I want more of this," she said. "This." Life, days that feel like ours, weeks that belong to something we're building, not chasing. "Then let's keep building." They didn't need promises anymore. They were already living them. Years passed. Vincent's designs expanded into full home interiors, with Nalan Crafted becoming a household name among families looking for beauty that wasn't fragile. He kept the heart of the business grounded: local workshops, real craftsmen, and community hires. He never left the shop floor, never stopped sketching with a pencil instead of a tablet. Madeline took Grayson Industries global, but on her terms. She stepped down as CEO 5 years after the wedding, not in defeat, but in evolution. She launched a leadership initiative for young women in underserved communities, building a legacy that had nothing to do with stock prices and everything to do with impact. They traveled occasionally, nothing extravagant, just places they'd always talked about. A cabin in Vermont in the fall, a beach house in Portugal where Caleb learned to surf, a farm in Tuscany where Vincent spent hours sketching barns and Madeline read under olive trees. Caleb grew taller, louder, and more curious. He never stopped asking questions. He built forts, wrote stories, argued about space travel, and once tried to convince them to adopt a goat. Their house was never quiet, it was alive. And one morning, as they sat on their front steps drinking coffee while the city stirred awake around them, Vincent looked at Madeline Hare a little longer, smiled a little softer, and said, "This is exactly where I was always supposed to be." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me too." They didn't need anything else. They had everything: